Are you as surprised as I was to see Obama strongly endorsing the military option in Afghanistan?
Well, I think you have to look at the audience, you have to look at the context, and I wouldn't judge the entire approach by one speech. I think it's still early days in terms of seeing what kind of strategy is going to unfold in Afghanistan. It is true, though, I would agree with what was said in the Globe and Mail the other day, that Obama has bought this war. In some ways, the same way that Stephen Harper bought the war from Paul Martin, Obama's bought this from George Bush. Originally, Afghanistan was really a way out of Iraq for Obama. I think in terms of showing that he was still going to be responsive to national security issues, but just not in Iraq. And Afghanistan was the counterpoint to that. Kind of the same way that Jean Chrétien avoided Iraq and went into Afghanistan. I think there's parallels there. The new troop commitment in Afghanistan is in some ways a bit worrisome in that it does seem to be escalating. But I'm not. I'm still hopeful that I think that the overall approach from a foreign policy standpoint that Obama has been taking, the indications are that there's a new tone, there's a new approach, there's one of much more interested in conciliation and dialogue, even just in terms of dealing with Russia and with Iran, who are two extremely important players in dealing with Afghanistan. Provides other opportunities for there. I think as well he's basically given up on trying to get more troops out of NATO. They'll still talk about it, but I don't think that that's going to come. So in some ways what is happening in Afghanistan is there's been a consolidation very much under U.S. leadership there, that the multinational role of ISAF in Afghanistan is going to be diminished in favor of a much more strong coordination and leadership and direction coming from the Pentagon in Afghanistan.
What are the signs of hope that you see in Obama's policy in contrast with, say, George Bush's?
Oh, I think it's a completely different tone. Set immediately the first day after the inauguration, when his first major media interview wasn't with even a U.S. network. It was with a major network in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East region, which is widely viewed there. I mean, that's just completely sea change approach. The fact that we're looking at getting disarmament negotiations back on with Russia, we're looking at probably cuts of major Cold War military programs out of the Pentagon. I think his discussions with Iran and his whole new tone of approach with the Muslim world is very important and is very optimistic.
So last week's speeches at NATO were can't be taken in isolation, you're saying?
I think you got to look at the whole package. You got Richard Holbrooke there as responsible for Pakistan and Afghanistan. Holbrooke was known as a very tough negotiator, brought about the Dayton Accords in I guess it was 95 in the former Yugoslavia, or maybe later than that rather. There's you can look at the glass half full and half empty. I'll give you that. But I still think that I'm not going to give up yet. That there's still hope for there. I think the military option, though, is one that's not going to work. We've already seen, in fact, every time we try to ramp up on the military standpoint, it actually strengthens the opposition. And with the U.S. sending in thousands more troops, it's now providing a new unifying factor for insurgent groups in Afghanistan and Pakistan together. And we've seen some indications that there's more alliances made in order to confront the U.S. In Afghanistan. So I think there are definitely some worrisome signs there. The election in Afghanistan will be important, and we're seeing that the U.S. is really pulling back its support from Karzai. Obama is no fan of the Karzai government, and for reasons just over the last few days with this so-called rape law and various problems, we can see why. So it's an evolving issue there. That being said, I think Canada still needs to be pretty clear that we don't want our troops there past 2011. We're going to be bringing them home, if not sooner. Canada will probably still have some role in Afghanistan afterwards, in some non-military way, but we got to get our troops out of there by 2011.
If the military approach is not going to work in Afghanistan, what kind of an approach will work?
Well, it's tough because we have been calling for negotiations since 2006, and at that point, arguably, NATO's hand was much better at that point. We had, some would say successes in the Panjwai district just outside of Kandahar. The insurgency, I think, was still in sort of an abatement mode. It's much worse now. I mean, since 2006, 2007, 2008, going into 2009, every year the statistics get worse. There's more people killed. We've lost control of more territory. Canadian troops have basically withdrawn from a number of forward operating bases, and they're just kind of hunkered down much more. We've seen much greater freedom of action for the insurgent groups in various parts of Afghanistan. We've seen fighting occur in areas that hadn't been in the last few years. So the insurgency is winning. They're winning the conflict. And so any kind of negotiation requires that both sides feel that they're going to get what they want faster by coming to the negotiating table than outside shooting at one another. So some could say that part of the troop buildup there is in fact part of perhaps a negotiating strategy to bring the sides to the table and to strengthen NATO's hands and to recoup lost ground over the last few years in some kind of negotiated settlement.
There are quite a few sides that have to negotiate together too, right? Quite a number of factions and cultural groups.
Well, I think that's the problem. Is there's lots of different aspects of this. It's a civil war essentially that's going on in Afghanistan with various other regional players seeking out their own advantage in this. And what the military strategy does is unify those disparate elements that may not have exactly the same common interests. There are various regional factions, tribal factions, but if you open up avenues to divide the ranks of the insurgents through a diplomatic or negotiated process, I think that will ultimately break the back of the insurgency rather than pushing forward on a military approach which unifies your opponents. I mean, military strategy, political strategy. We all know that the best way to achieve your gains is to do things that divide your opposition, not unify them. And to me, the military option unifies them. A diplomatic solution can divide those groups and separate them out. And that way, if I was to project forward, if we were to see a trained-up Afghan National Army, maybe even with the assistance of other international countries, maybe under the auspices of the UN or some other multinational body, you could see a peace support role for troops, other troops, not ours, but others, to bring about a peaceful settlement of this and provide the security to allow the peace agreement to take root and for the development and the human rights to carry on forward.
Finally, going back to Obama, how would you compare and contrast Obama's approach to Afghanistan with Stephen Harper's, and what do you think Canadians should be telling Stephen Harper at this point?
Well, I think they're increasingly out of step. I mean, in many ways, Harper was lock, stock, and barrel in with the Bush administration, and now increasingly, I think you're seeing a difference in approaches here. That we've seen Canada really focus on a military role. We've seen the Harper government deride any discussion of negotiations or diplomacy. Harper is really, I think, now trying to keep up with the United States in this regard, where Obama is going. But I think they've been very much out of sync. And the U.S. is essentially going to assert itself there.
What should Canadians be asking their government to do at this point?
Well, absolutely not extend the mission beyond 2011, and I think that needs to be a clear mission, clear message to both Prime Minister Harper and Mr. Ignatieff as well too. I think we need to ensure that the Liberals stick to that position as well too. We should encourage those voices in Parliament, in the Bloc, certainly the NDP and others, that we seek out other alternatives for Afghanistan, that we find a way to not continue to fight the war, but to end the war there.
Thank you very much, Steve Staples.
My pleasure.